Welcome back to Hot Dad Reads, where I read you a book every night, except for the nights when I'm kind of busy or my daughter is teething. We are reading Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Uh, we're on page 155. That's where we're at. We're still in part one. We're on like book 4 or 5, I think. So we're making pretty good pace. So, yeah. Do you have any fun dad things to say today? I took the little one in for her third COVID shot, which was nice. And anytime you get to be like a competent dad in public, but especially uh, taking the little one while my wife is working to the pediatrician, it's easy just to be candy to everyone else who's there. So but she's now large enough that she's no longer in the little carrier car seat. I have to physically pick her up and put her into a car seat. So now when I take her out, I don't get to walk around with a big car seat. I'm just holding a baby, which honestly I kind of prefer. It's really nice. But yeah, I feel like it's more nurturing looking, which is kind of great. She's doing well. Things are going well. I don't have any weird dad stories today. Other than that, I'm so glad it finally rained because I mowed the lawn and got a lot of dead grass chunks everywhere. But nonetheless, Les Miserables. Let's jump in. Chapter 5. Vague glimmerings on the horizon. Little by little, over the course of time, all opposition to him fell away. By virtue of a sort of law to which those who better themselves are always subject, there had at first been slanders and calumnies against Monsieur Madeleine. Then there were just malicious comments. Then just rude remarks. And that was the end of it. Respect for him was total, unanimous, and cordial. And there came a time around 1821 when the words Monsieur le Maire were uttered at Montreuil-sur-Mer with almost the same expression as the words Monseigneur l'Evêque had been uttered at Dinan in 1815. People came from 25 miles around to consult Monsieur Madeleine. He ended disagreements, prevented lawsuits, reconciled enemies. Everyone recognized his authority as judge. It was as if he were animated by the hook of natural law, animated by the book of natural law. It was like a contagion of respect that over 6 or 7 years was passed on from one to another and infected the whole area. One man alone in the town and its surroundings totally escaped this contagion, and no matter what Père Madeleine did, he remained resistant, as if some sort of incorruptible and imperturbable instinct kept him alert and uneasy. It would seem to be the case that there exists in certain men a real animal instinct. Like all instincts, pure and true to itself, one that creates antipathies and sympathies, that inevitably separates one type of person from another, that does not waver, is never perplexed, never silenced, and never fading. An instinct clear in its obscurity, infallible, compelling, intractable to all counsel of the intellect and all powers of reasoning against it. An instinct that, however destinies may be shaped, secretly warns the dog man of the presence of the cat man, and the fox man of the presence of the lion man. Often when Monsieur Madeleine went by in the street, peaceable, loving, with the blessings of everyone around him, a tall man dressed in an iron-gray frock-coat, armed with a stout walking stick and wearing his hat pulled down, would swing round behind him and follow him with his eyes until he was out of sight, folding his arms, slowly shaking his head, and pursuing his upper and lower lips towards his nose, a sort of meaningful grimace that might be translated as, "Now who on earth is that man? I'm sure I've seen him somewhere before." Anyhow, I'm not in the least taken by him. This person, whose gravity was almost menacing, was one of those men who even when only fleetingly glimpsed, arrest the viewer's attention. His name was Javert, and he was with the police. At Montreuil-sur-Mer, he had the invidious but useful job of inspector. He had not witnessed Madeleine's career from the outset. Javert owned the position beheld to the protection of Monsieur Chabouillet, secretary to the Minister of State, Comte Anglès, then prefect of Paris, and then prefect of police in Paris. When Javert arrived at Montreuil-sur-Mer, the great manufacturer's fortune was already made, and Père Madeleine had become Monsieur Madeleine. Certain police officers have a distinctive physiognomy, one in which an air of baseness is combined with an air of authority. Javert had this physiognomy without the baseness. It is our firm belief that if souls were visible to the eye, we should clearly see that strange things whereby every single member of the human species corresponds to some species of the animal world. And we would easily be able to recognize that truth barely apprehended by the philosopher, which is that from the oyster to the eagle, from the pig to the tiger, all animals are to be found in mankind, and each one of them is to be found in some man, sometimes even several at a time. Animals are nothing other than the physical representation of our virtues and vices, wandering about before our eyes, and visible specters of our souls. God lets us see them so as to make us think. However, since animals are mere shadows, God has made them capable only of being trained, not educated. What good would it serve? By contrast, our souls, being realities and having a purpose of their own, God has given them intelligence, that is to say, the capability to be educated. A good social education can always elicit from any soul whatsoever the usefulness it contains. This, of course, is said from the limited viewpoint of visible earthly life, without prejudice to the profound question of the prior and ulterior personality of living beings other than man. The visible self in no way authorizes the philosopher to deny the hidden self. With this reservation, let us continue. Now, if the reader will grant for a moment that there is in every man one of the animal species in creation, it will be easy for us to say which of them resided in police officer Javert. The peasants of Asturias are convinced that in every she-wolf's litter there is one dog, which is killed by the mother, because otherwise, as it grew up, it would eat the rest of her young. Given this son of a wolf dog a human face, and you have Javert. It's hard to read. It was too dark in here. Javert was born in prison of a fortune teller whose husband was a convicted felon. As he grew up, he believed he was on the outside of society and had no hope of ever being let in. He observed that society unforgivingly kept out two classes of men, those who attack it and those who guard it. He had the choice between these two classes only. At the same time, he was conscious of some underlying inflexibility, steadiness and probity within him, compounded by an inexpressible hatred for that gypsy race to which he belonged. He joined the police. He made his mark. By the age of 40, he was an inspector. As a young man, he worked with the chain gangs in the South. Before going any further, let us be clear about the term human face that we have just applied to Javert. Javert's human face consisted of a flat nose, with 2 deep nostrils, and enormous whiskers growing up his cheeks towards them. The first time you saw those 2 forests and those 2 cavernous holes, you felt unnerved. When Javert laughed, which was rare and dreadful, his thin lips parted and revealed not only his teeth but his gums, and a ferocious, flattened crease formed round his nose as on the muzzle of a wild beast. Javert in serious mood was a mastiff. When he laughed, he was a tiger. Besides which, a low brow, a full jaw, his hair concealing his forehead and falling over his eyebrows, between his eyes a permanent central furrow like a blaze of anger, an impenetrable gaze, a tight-lipped and fearsome mouth, a fierce air of command. This man was made up of 2 very simple sentiments, and within reason very good ones, which he rendered almost bad by taking them to extremes: respect for authority and hatred of rebellion. And in his eyes, theft, murder, any crime was simply a form of rebellion. He looked on any state official, from the prime minister to the rural policeman, with a deep-seated blind faith. On anyone who had once crossed the legal threshold of wrongdoing, he heaped scorn, loathing, and disgust. He was uncompromising, and he allowed of no exceptions. On the one hand, he said, the state official is incapable of making a mistake. The magistrate is never wrong. On the other, he said, these people are lost beyond redemption. Nothing good can come of them. He fully shared the view held by those extremists who attribute to human laws some extraordinary power of creating, or, if you will, of recognizing outcasts, and who place a Styx at the bottom of society. A melancholy dreamer, he was stoical, serious, austere, and, like fanatics, humble and haughty. He was gimlet-eyed, his gaze cold and piercing. His whole life was contained in these 2 words: watchfulness, vigilance. He had introduced a straight line into what was most tortuous in the world: conscientious in his usefulness. He made a religion of his duties, and he was a spy as other men are priests. Woe betide the man who fell into his hands. He would have arrested his father for escaping from prison and denounced his mother for contravening the terms of her release from gaol. How do you say that word? Gaol? Gaol? Gaol. Gao. And he would have done so with that kind of inward satisfaction conferred by virtuousness. To accompany this, a life of privation, isolation, abnegation, chastity, never a moment's recreation. This was implacable duty, an understanding of the police like the Spartans' understanding of Sparta, pitiless surveillance, ferocious honesty, a sleuth of marble-like coldness. Brutus in Vidocq. Belt is very tight. Javert's entire person was an expression of the man who spies and keeps out of sight. Pardon me. Joseph de Maistre's I had a great dinner, by the way. Joseph de Maistre's mystical school of thought, which at the time was spicing up with high-flown cosmogony what were called the ultra newspapers, would surely have said that Javert was a symbol. You could not see his forehead, which disappeared under his hat. You could not see his eyes that lurked beneath his eyebrows. You could not see his chin that sank into his cravat. You could not see his hands that vanished up his sleeves. You could not see his cane that he carried under his coat, but when the occasion arose, Suddenly emerging from all this shadow as from an ambush, you could see a narrow, angular forehead, a baleful glance, a threatening chin, huge hands, and a monstrous truncheon. This is neat. Javert reminds me of the hunter from Bloodborne right now. Even though he hated books, in his moments of leisure, which were few and far between, he read, with the result that he was not completely uneducated. This was made evident in a certain pomposity in his manner of speaking. As we have said, he had no vices. When he was pleased with himself, he allowed himself a pinch of snuff. This was his link with humanity. It will not be hard to understand that Javert was the terror of that whole class referred to in the annual report of the Ministry of Justice under the heading Vagrants. At the mention of Javert's name, they would make themselves scarce. An appearance by Javert himself would petrify them. Such was this formidable man. Javert was like an eye constantly fixed on Monsieur Madeleine, an eye full of suspicion and conjecture. Monsieur Madeleine eventually noticed, but it appeared that this was of no interest to him. He did not even question Javert. He neither sought him out nor avoided him, and he bore that intrusive and almost oppressive gaze without appearing to pay any attention to it. He treated Javert the same way he treated everybody, with an unassuming kindness. From a few words Javert let drop, it was clear that with that curiosity bred in the bone, in which instinct plays as great a part as willpower, he had secretly investigated all previous traces Père Madeleine might have left elsewhere. He seemed to know, and sometimes he said cryptically that someone had made certain inquiries in a certain place about a certain family that had disappeared. Talking to himself, he once happened to remark, "I think I've got him." Then he remained preoccupied for 3 days, without uttering a word. It seemed the lead he thought he had come to nothing. In any case, and this is the necessary corrective to any oversimplification that certain words might have implied, there can be nothing truly infallible about any human being, and it is precisely in the nature of instinct that it can become confused, thrown off the scent, and led astray. Otherwise, instinct would be superior to intelligence, and beasts would turn out to have a better understanding than man. Javert was evidently somewhat disconcerted by Monsieur Madeleine's complete naturalness and calm. One day, however, his strange manner seemed to make an impression on Monsieur Madeleine. This was the occasion. And I drink a bit of water. Wow. So, Javert is the opposite of the priest. The priest has a connection with society, loves the poor, calls the rich out to charity, and in doing so helps save their souls and whatnot. Reads, has, his own time for himself, walks in his garden, He has an enjoyment of life and all the people in it, despite the fact that everything he does is about, fixing the ills and problems of the world, but by that he means society, whereas Javert is society. He holds it up. He doesn't like anyone. He's a dick. He has no joy. He doesn't read. And on occasions, when the moon is full, he has to go out and fight a bunch of beasts because he's infected with the old blood. This is neat. Also, as a quick shout out, I got this book from the library, and when all the streaming services and whatnot shut down, and there aren't any movies in the coming year because of companies not being able to understand the demands of people who are working and striking. Remember, go to the library. They have TV shows. They have movies. They have books. They are a library. They're a catalog. And the people working there are happy that you come, and they don't care what it is that you check out. They just want you to be there. And it doesn't cost you anything. It's a library. It's a public library. It is not staffed by your second grade teacher who is going to go out of their way to make you feel bad that you're not reading and not reading enough, even when you are reading. They don't care. So, if not now, then at least then when everything's far too expensive and there's nothing new to watch, and you're like, man, I want to watch something. I don't want to give my money to Apple. Don't. Go to the library. And especially in this case, this book is due back in 5 days, except that they don't have late fees. So it automatically renews. So I have this book for 12 weeks? Probably not long enough to actually finish reading this book at the length that it is. But, it's going to take me a while. And it just automatically renews. And I love that about the library. Chapter 6. Père Fauchelevent. I'm going to say that name a lot in this chapter, I bet. One morning, Monsieur Madeleine was walking along an unpaved side street in Montreuil-sur-Mer. He heard a noise and saw a group of people some way off. He approached them. An old man called Père Fauchelevent had just fallen under his cart when his horse had pitched to the ground. This Fauchelevent was one of the few enemies Monsieur Madeleine still had at that time. When Madeleine first came to the town, Fauchelevent, a former copyist, of peasant stock and almost literate, had a business that was beginning to go badly. Fauchelevent had seen this ordinary laborer grow rich, while he, a skilled tradesman, was being ruined. This had filled him with jealousy, and he had done all he could on every occasion to discredit Madeleine. Then came bankruptcy, and the old man, left with nothing but a horse and a cart, with no family and no children, had turned carter to earn a living. The horse had 2 broken haunches and could not get up again. The old man was trapped between the wheels. So calamitous was the collapse of the vehicle that the whole weight of it was resting on his chest. The cart was quite heavily laden. Père Fauchelevent was wheezing pitifully. People had tried to pull him out, but to no avail. One reckless move, one clumsy intervention, one inadvertent jolt might finish him off. It was impossible to free him other than by lifting the cart off him. Javert, who had turned up just as the accident occurred, sent for a jack. Monsieur Madeleine arrived. People stood aside respectfully. "Help!" cried old Fauchelevent. "What kindly lad will save this old man?" Monsieur Madeleine turned to those gathered round. "Has anyone got a jack?" "Someone's gone to fetch one," replied a peasant. "How long will that take?" "They've gone to the nearest place where there's a farrier, which is Flachot, but all the same, it'll take a good quarter of an hour." "A quarter of an hour!" exclaimed Madeleine. It had rained the day before. The ground was wet. With every moment the cart was settling deeper into the ground and compressing the old carter's chest more and more. It was obvious that within 5 minutes his ribs would be broken. "We can't wait a quarter of an hour," said Madeleine to the peasants who were staring at him. "We'll have to. But it'll be too late by then. Can't you see the cart is sinking? It can't be helped." "Listen," said Madeleine. "There's still room enough under the cart to allow a man to crawl under it and lift it on his back for just half a minute, and the poor man can be pulled out. Is there anyone here who has the strength and the courage for 5 gold louis?" No one in the group moved. 10 louis, said Madeleine. Those present lowered their eyes. One of them muttered, "A man would need to be devilish strong, and then he runs the risk of getting crushed." "Come on," said Madeleine. 20 louis. The same silence. "It's not willingness they lack," said a voice. Let me try that again, because I like the Javert voice. It's not willingness they lack, said a voice. Monsieur Madeleine turned round and recognized Javert, whom he had not noticed on his arrival. Javert went on, It's strength. It would take an extraordinary man to do such a thing as lift a cart like that on his back. Then, staring intently at Monsieur Madeleine, he went on, dwelling on every word he uttered. Monsieur Madeleine, I have never known but one man capable of doing what you ask. Madeleine flinched. Javert added with an air of indifference, but without taking his eyes off Madeleine, He was a convict. Ah, said Madeleine, serving a penal sentence at Toulon. Madeleine turned pale. Meanwhile, the cart continued to sink slowly. Père Fauchelevent wheezed and shrieked. Perfect timing for burps. I can't breathe. It's breaking my ribs. A jack something. Ah! Madeleine looked around. Is there no one, then, who wants to earn 20 louis and save the life of this poor old man? None of those present stirred. Javert spoke again. I've never known more than one man who could substitute for a jack. It was that convict. It's crushing me, cried the old man. Madeleine looked up, met Javert's hawk eye still fixed on him, gazed at the motionless peasants, and smiled sadly. Then, without a word, he fell on his knees, and before the crowd had time even to utter a cry, he was underneath the cart. There was a dreadful moment of expectation and silence. They saw Madeleine, almost flat on his stomach under that tremendous weight, make two vain efforts to draw his elbows closer to his knees. They shouted to him, Père Madeleine, come out from under there! Old Fauchelevent himself said to him, Monsieur Madeleine, get out! Don't you see it can't be helped? I'm going to die. Just leave me. You're going to get crushed as well. Madeleine did not reply. The spectators gasped. The wheels had continued to sink, and already it had become almost impossible for Madeleine to get out from under the vehicle. Suddenly, the enormous mass was seen to quiver. The cart rose slowly. The wheels half emerged from the ruts. They heard a choked voice crying, Quick! Help! It was Madeleine, who had just made one last effort. They rushed forward. The self-sacrifice of a single man had given strength and courage to all. The cart was lifted by 20 men. Old Fauchelevent was saved. Madeleine stood up. He was pale, though dripping with sweat. His clothes were torn and covered with mud. Everyone was tearful. The old man kissed his knees and called him the good Lord. He himself had on his face an indescribable expression of bliss and heavenly suffering, and he fixed his calm gaze on Javert, who was still staring at him. Water break. Just checking out my lighting at the moment. If we get more Patreon subscribers at patreon.com/hotdadreads, we'll be able to afford like a camera and not an iPad. I'm grateful for the iPad and that it can do this, but at some point we'll have a camera, and that'll be nice. Then I can set the exposure and the focus and everything. Have it in 4K. That'd be fun. Granted, then I'll need to have it connected to I don't know if you can connect like a camera to an iPad, but I need like a good computer then to stream from. So it'll be some doing. But that's what all the different Patreon levels are for. Hey man, all you gotta do, sign up. The cheapest one is really the only one I care about, and that's the one that gets you access to the super secret Saturday Shakespeare stream. I think I might get to do it this Saturday. I've got rehearsal for my play. Because I wrote a play and it's getting produced. Woo! I don't know when that'll be done. But those streams are only like an hour right now. I don't really need to go 2 hours with those. And we'll finish Julius Caesar most likely. So just saying. Or not. It's a secret. You don't know when it'll be. Maybe it won't be this Saturday. Maybe it's the secret Saturday and not the Saturday on the calendar. You don't know. But you will if you're a Patreon subscriber. Chapter 7, Fauchelevent becomes a gardener in Paris. Fauchelevent had dislocated his kneecap in falling. Père Madeleine had him conveyed to an infirmary that he had established for his workers in the factory building itself, and which was staffed by 2 sisters of charity. I hate burping. I hate burping in the microphone, but you know, here we are. Come on. The next morning, the old man found a 1,000-franc banknote on his bedside table, with this note in Père Madeleine's handwriting: "For the purchase of your horse and cart." The cart was a wreck, and the horse was dead. Fauchelevent recovered, but his knee remained stiff. On the recommendation of the Sisters of Charity and of his parish priest, Monsieur Madeleine got the old boy a position as gardener at a convent in Rue Saint-Ouen in Paris. Sometime afterwards, Monsieur Madeleine was appointed mayor. The first time Javert saw Monsieur Madeleine wearing the sash that gave him full authority over the town, he felt a shudder of the kind a watchdog might feel on smelling a wolf in his master's clothes. From then on he avoided him as much as he could. When his duties made it absolutely necessary, and he had no alternative but to be with the Monsieur le Maire, he addressed him with profound respect. Besides the visible signs we have mentioned of this prosperity created at Montreuil-sur-Mer by Père Madeleine, there was another indicator none the less significant for not being visible. Always a sure sign, this. When the population is hard-pressed, when there is a shortage of work, when business is disastrous, the taxpayer, being short of money, is reluctant to pay taxes, delays as much as possible, and then exceeds the respite granted, and the state spends a great deal of money on the costs of enforcement and collection. When there is plenty of work, when the country is happy and wealthy, taxes are paid willingly at little cost to the state. It may be said this is one infallible gauge of public wealth and poverty, the cost of collecting taxes. In 7 years, the cost of collecting taxes had dropped by 75% in the arrondissement, an administrative subdivision of a département, of Montreuil-sur-Mer, which led to this arrondissement being frequently cited above all others by Monsieur de Villèle, then Minister of Finance. Monsieur de Villiers? These were the local circumstances when Fantine returned. No one remembered her. Fortunately, the door of Monsieur Madeleine's factory was like a friendly face. She applied there, and was taken on in the women's workshop. The work being entirely new to Fantine, she could not be very adept at it, so she made very little money for her day's work, but still it was enough. The problem was solved. She was earning her living. Chapter 8. Madame Victurnien spends 35 francs for the sake of morality. Victurnien? Victurnien? When Fantine saw that she was making her living, she enjoyed a moment of happiness. To live honestly by the work she did, what a blessing. She truly regained a liking for work. She bought a looking-glass and took pleasure in looking at her youth, her beautiful hair, her fine teeth. She forgot many things. She thought only of Cosette and the possibilities of the future, and was almost happy. She rented a small room and furnished it on credit against her future earnings, a vestige of her improvident ways. Not being able to say she was married, she had been very careful, as we have already indicated, not to talk about her little girl. Hey, buddy. Oh. I thought we'd have a cat. In those early days, as we have seen, she paid the Thénardiers promptly. As all she could do was sign her name, she was obliged to write to them using a public letter writer. She wrote often. This was noticed. There started to be mutterings in the women's workroom that Fantine wrote letters and that she put on airs and graces. There is nothing like those for whom it is none of their business for spying on other people's actions. Why is it that gentleman only ever comes at dusk? Why is it that gentleman only ever comes at dusk? Why does Monsieur So-and-so never hang his key on the hook on Thursdays? Why does he always go down the back street? Why does Madame always get out of her cab before she reaches the house? Why does she send out for a pad of writing paper when she has a whole writing case full of it, etc., etc.? There are people who find out the answer to these mysteries, which in any case are absolutely no concern of theirs, spend more money, waste more time, take more trouble than it would take to do 10 good deeds, and all this for nothing, just for the pleasure of it, with no other reward for their curiosity except curiosity. They will follow this man or that woman for days on end, keeping watch for hours on street corners, in gateways, at night, in the cold and rain. They will grease the palms of errand boys, get cab drivers and lackeys drunk, bribe a chambermaid, offer inducements to a doorkeeper. Why? For no reason. Sheer desperation to see, to know, and to find out. Sheer compulsion to gossip. And often, to the great joy of those who have uncovered all, with nothing to be gained by it, out of sheer instinct, these secrets once found out, and these mysteries made public, these enigmas exposed to the light of day lead to catastrophes, duels, bankruptcies, ruined families, devastated lives. A sorry state of affairs. Certain individuals are malicious solely because of their need to talk. Their conversation, drawing-room chatter, boudoir gossip is like those chimneys that burn wood fast. They need a great deal of fuel, and their fuel is their fellow human being. So, Fantine was watched. Besides which, more than one woman was jealous of her golden hair and her white teeth. It was noted that in the workroom, among the others, she often turned aside to wipe away a tear. These were the moments when she was thinking of her child, perhaps also of the man she loved. Severing unhappy ties with the past is a painful and arduous process. It was noted that she wrote at least twice a month, always to the same address, and that she paid for the postage. A way was found to obtain the address. Monsieur Thénardier, innkeeper at Montfermeil. The public letter writer, an old fellow who could not fill his stomach with red wine without emptying his bag of secrets, was encouraged to blab in the tavern. In short, it came to be known that Fantine had a child. She must have been some kind of prostitute. There was one old busybody who made the trip to Montfermeil talked to the Thénardiers, and said on her return, "For my 35 francs I've got to the bottom of it. I've seen the child." The busybody who did this was a Gorgon named Madame Victurnien, guardian and doorkeeper of everyone's virtue. Ah, man, I don't know in what situation I'll get to call someone that. Like, when would I meet such a gossip and be like, "Oh, there's Jack, guardian and doorkeeper of everyone's virtue." Oh, it's such a good. Like, I'm not looking for opportunities to be, sassy and rude, but it's Victor Hugo. I mean, come on. Madame Victurnien was 56, and her mask of ugliness was overlaid with the mask of old age. Quavering voice, crotchety mind. Hard to believe this old woman had once been young. I read that sentence without knowing what I was reading. That's fantastic. In her youth, when 93 was in full spate, she married a monk who fled the cloister wearing the revolutionary's red cap, switching from the Bernardines to the Jacobins. She was unfeeling, unpleasant, unapproachable, peevish, prickly, almost poisonous, and now widowed, still harboring the memory of the monk who had thoroughly subdued her and bent her to his will. She was a nettle that you could see had been crushed by the cassock. An allusion to the expression jeter le froc à orties, literally to throw the cassock into the nettles, i.e. to give up the monastic life. With the Restoration she became devout, and so zealously that the priests forgave her her monk. She had a small property that she made a great fuss about bequeathing to a religious community. She was very highly regarded at the episcopal palace of Arras. So this Madame Victurnien went to Montfermeil and returned saying, "I've seen the child." All this took time. Fantine had been at the factory for over a year, when one morning the workshop supervisor gave her 50 francs on behalf of Monsieur le Maire, telling her she no longer had a job at the workshop, and urging her on behalf of Monsieur le Maire to leave town. It was the very same month that the Thénardiers, having asked for 12 francs instead of 6, had just demanded 15 francs instead of 12. Fantine was devastated. She could not leave town. She owed money for her rent and her furniture. 50 francs was not enough to pay off this debt. She stammered out a few pleading words. The supervisor made clear to her she must leave the workshop immediately. Besides, Fantine was not an especially good worker. Overcome with shame even more than despair, she left the workshop and returned to her room. So her offense was now known to all. She felt she had not the strength left to say another word. She was advised to go and see Monsieur le Maire. She did not dare. Monsieur le Maire gave her 50 francs because he was kind, and sacked her because he was just. She submitted to that judgment. A little bit of water. Man, I like this book. It's really good. In that it just feels like lots of little beginnings, middles, and ends, lots of little stories within it. Just the way that Victor Hugo writes it, just being like, one time, one day, this person came and did this, and this person did that, and that was that. Just that kind of writing. That strikes me. I like that. Oh. was going to say, I feel like I'm about an eighth of the way through the book, and then doing the math, I am an eighth of the way through the book, so good for me. Chapter 9, Success for Madame Victurnien. So the monk's widow was good for something. But Monsieur Madeleine knew nothing of all this. It was one of those combinations of circumstances that life is full of. As a rule, Monsieur Madeleine almost never went into the woman's workshop. He had placed in charge of this workshop an elderly spinster provided by the parish priest, and he had full confidence in this supervisor, a truly respectable person, firm, fair-minded, full of the chastity that consists in donating, but not so much of the charity that consists in understanding and forgiving. Monsieur Madeleine left everything to her. The best of men are often obliged to delegate their authority. It was invested with this full power, and in the conviction she was doing the right thing, that the supervisor tried, judged, condemned, and executed Fantine. As for the 50 francs, she donated them out of a fund Monsieur Madeleine had entrusted to her for the benefit and assistance of the working women, and for which she did not have to account. Fantine sought work locally as a servant. She went from house to house. No one would have her. She could not leave town. The second-hand dealer to whom she was in debt for her furniture, such as it was, said to her, "If you leave, I'll have you arrested as a thief." The landlord to whom she owed rent said to her, "You're young and pretty. You can pay." She divided the 50 francs between the landlord and the furniture dealer, returned to the latter 3/4 of his goods, kept only the bare minimum, and found herself with no work, with no place in society, left only with her bed, and still owing about 50 francs. She began to make plain shirts for the soldiers of the garrison, and earned 12 sous a day. Her daughter cost her 10. It was at this point that she began to fall behind with her payments to the Thénardiers. However, an old woman who lighted her candle for her when she came home at night taught her the art of living in poverty. Beyond living on little, there is living on nothing. They are 2 rooms. The first is dark, the second is pitch black. Fantine learned how to go without any fire at all in winter, how to give up a bird that eats 1/4 of a sou's worth of millet every 2 days, how to make a coverlet of your underskirt and an underskirt of your coverlet, how to save your candle by taking your meals by the light from the window opposite. We do not know how much some poor creatures who have grown old in honest destitution can get out of 1 sou. It eventually becomes a talent. Fantine acquired this sublime talent, and again took heart a little. At this period she said to her neighbor, "I tell myself, with only 5 hours sleep, and working all the rest of the time at my sewing, I'll always be able to earn just about enough to live on. And anyway, when you're sad, you eat less. Oh well, some hardship, some worries, a little bread on the one hand and heartache on the other, all that will keep me going." In this predicament, it would have been a peculiar joy to have her little girl with her. She thought of fetching her. But what? Make her share this hardship? And besides, she owed money to the Thénardiers. How was she to settle her debt? And the journey? How was she to pay for that? The old woman who had given her what might be called lessons of life in poverty, lessons in a life of poverty, was a saintly spinster called Marguerite, a woman of true devoutness, poor and charitable towards the poor, and even towards the rich, able to write just well enough to sign her name Marguerite, and believing in God, which is true knowledge. For the record, Marguerite is misspelled when she writes it. There are many of these saints here below. Someday they will have their place on high. This life has a tomorrow. At first Fantine felt so ashamed. She dared not go out. When she was in the street, she sensed that people turned round behind her and pointed. Everyone stared at her, and no one greeted her. The cold, bitter scorn of passers-by penetrated her, body and soul like a north wind. In small towns, an unmarried mother might as well be exposed naked to everyone's taunts and prying. At least in Paris no one knows you, and this obscurity clothes you. Oh, how she must have yearned to come to Paris. Impossible. The cat is playing with a toy at my feet. And he's going to hit the lights, so we're going to take the toy and whoop! There it goes. Is that too dark? That's too dark. See, the shadow's a little bright behind me there. See, if I had a fill light, then I'd hit that white spot behind me, but I don't have a fill light. Oh well. She had to get used to disrepute, just as she had to get used to penury. Gradually, she resigned herself to it. After 2 or 3 months, she shook off her shame and began to go about as though nothing bothered her. "It's all the same to me," she would say. She came and went with head held high and a bitter smile, and felt she was becoming brazen. From her window, Madame Victurnien sometimes saw her passing, observed the plight of that creature who, thanks to her, had been put in her rightful place, and congratulated herself. The wicked have a cruel happiness. Fantine was exhausted by overwork, and the little dry cough she had worsened. She sometimes said to her neighbor Marguerite, "Just feel how hot my hands are." Still, when in the morning, with an old broken comb, she combed her beautiful hair, like cascades of floss silk, she took a moment's pleasure in her appearance. Chapter 10. The Consequences of Her Success. Fantine had been sacked towards the end of winter. Then it was summer, but winter came again. Short days, less work. Winter. No warmth, no light, no middle of the day. Evening following on morning. Fog, twilight, the window gray, the light so bad you cannot see. The sky is a basement window, the whole day a cellar. The sun looks like a pauper. What a dreadful time of year! Winter turns to stone both the rain from heaven and the heart of man. Her creditors harried her. Fantine earned too little. Her debts had grown. Not getting their money, the Thénardiers were constantly writing her letters whose contents upset her terribly, and the cost of their delivery was ruining her. One day they wrote saying that her little Cosette was going stark naked in that cold weather, that she needed a woolen skirt, and the least her mother could do was to send 10 francs for it. She received the letter and crumpled it in her hands all day long. That evening she went to a barber's shop at the corner of the street and pulled out her hairpin. Her lovely golden hair fell to below her waist. "What beautiful hair!" exclaimed the barber. "How much will you give me for it?" she said. 10 francs. Cut it off. She bought a knitted skirt and sent it to the Thénardiers. This skirt infuriated the Thénardiers. It was the money they wanted. They gave the skirt to Éponine. Poor Alouette continued to shiver. Fantine thought, "My child's not cold now. I've clothed her with my hair." She wore little round caps that concealed her shorn head, and she still looked pretty in them. A sinister process was at work in Fantine's heart. When she saw that she could no longer dress her hair, she began to feel hatred for everything around her. She had long shared everyone's reverence for Père Madeleine, yet by telling herself over and over again that it was he who had sacked her, that he was the cause of her unhappiness, she came to hate him too, him especially. If she passed by the factory at times when the workers were at the gate, she put on a show of laughing and singing. An old woman working there, who once saw her laughing and singing like that, said, "There's a girl who come to a bad end." She took a lover, just anybody, a man she did not love, out of bravado with rage in her heart. He was a scoundrel, some sort of beggar musician, a lazy tramp who beat her and left her as he had taken her, and left her as she had taken him, in disgust. She adored her child. The further she fell, and the darker everything around her became, the more brightly shone that sweet little angel deep in her soul. She said, "When I'm rich, I'll have my Cosette with me." And she laughed. She could not get rid of her cough, and she had sweats down her back. But now we pet a cat. Hey, buddy. One day she received from the Thénardiers a letter that read as follows: "Cosette is ill with a local sickness. A military fever, they call it. She needs expensive drugs. This is ruining us, and we cannot pay out any more. If you do not send us 40 francs before the week is out, the little one will die." She burst out laughing and said to her old neighbor, "Oh, very funny, 40 francs, is that all? That's 2 Napoleons. Where do they expect me to find them? Are they stupid, these peasants?" Yet she went out onto that staircase and reread the letter by a skylight. Then she carried on down the stairs and went out, running and skipping, still laughing. Somebody who met her said, "What have you got to be so cheerful about?" She replied, "There are some people in the country who have just written me a very silly letter. They want 40 francs from me." That's peasants for you. As she crossed the square, she saw a number of people gathered round a bizarre-shaped carriage, with a man, dressed in red, standing on top of it, holding forth. He was a traveling mountebank dentist, who was offering the public full sets of dentures, opiates, powders, and elixirs. Fantine mingled with the crowd, and began to laugh like everyone else at this harangue, which included slang for the riff-raff and scientific jargon for respectable folk. The tooth-puller saw this pretty girl laughing, and suddenly cried out, "You! The girl there laughing, you have pretty teeth. If you want to sell me your 2 gnashers, I'll give you a gold Napoleon for each of them." "What are my gnashers?" asked Fantine. "Your gnashers," replied the dental professor, "are your front teeth, the top 2 ones." "How horrible!" exclaimed Fantine. "2 Napoleons," grumbled a toothless old crone standing there. "Well, there's a lucky girl." Fantine fled and blocked her ears so as not to hear the hoarse voice of the man shouting after her, "Think about it, pretty girl. 2 Napoleons can come in handy. If you fancy it, come to the Lac d'Argent Inn this evening. You'll find me there." I didn't know he had a hoarse voice, but, I'm not doing a hoarse voice tonight. It's too late. Fantine returned home. She was furious and recounted the incident to her good neighbor Marguerite. "Can you imagine? My God, what a dreadful man! How can such people be allowed to go about the place? Pull out my 2 front teeth, why, I'd look horrible. Hair grows again, but teeth? Oh, the man's a monster. I'd rather throw myself headfirst into the street from the 5th floor. He told me he'd be at the Tillac d'Argent this evening. And what did he offer? Asked Marguerite. 2 Napoleons. That's 40 francs. Yes, said Fantine. That's 40 francs. She remained pensive and took up her sewing. After a quarter of an hour, she left her sewing and went out onto the staircase to reread the Thénardier's letter. Coming back into the room, she said to Marguerite, who was working with her, "What is this military fever, do you know?" "Yes," replied the old maid, "it's a sickness." "So it calls for a lot of drugs?" "Oh, an awful lot of drugs." "How do you get it?" "It's a sickness that just comes over you." "So it attacks children?" "Especially children." "Do people die of it?" "Very easily," said Marguerite. Fantine went out onto the staircase again to reread her letter. That evening she came downstairs, and was seen heading in the direction of Rue de Paris, where the inns are. The next morning, when Marguerite went into Fantine's room before daylight, for they always worked together, and so lit just one candle between the two of them, she found Fantine sitting on her bed, looking pale, cold as ice. She had not laid her head on the pillow. Her bonnet had dropped into her lap. Her candle had been burning all night and was almost entirely consumed. Marguerite stopped in the doorway, paralyzed by this enormous disarray, and cried, "Lord, the candle's burned right down! Something's happened!" Then she looked at Fantine, who turned her shorn head towards her. Fantine had aged 10 years since the day before. "Dear Jesus," said Marguerite, "what's wrong with you, Fantine?" "Nothing's wrong," replied Fantine. "Quite the contrary. My child won't die of that awful sickness for want of help. I'm pleased." So saying, she showed the old maid 2 Napoleons glinting on the table. "Good Lord!" cried Marguerite. "Why, that's a fortune! Where did you get those gold coins?" "Those gold louis." "Got them, I did," replied Fantine. At the same time she smiled. The candle lit her face. It was a bloody smile. Red-tinged saliva stained the corners of her mouth, and there was a black hole between her lips. The 2 teeth had been pulled out. She sent the 40 francs to Montfermeil. It was actually a ruse on the part of the Thénardiers to get money out of her. Cosette was not ill. Fantine threw her mirror out of the window. She had long since left her small cell on the 2nd floor for a garret with a latch door under the roof. One of those attic spaces with the ceiling sloping down to the floor that you keep banging your head against. The poor can no more reach the end of their room than the end of their life without having to stoop lower and lower. Her bed was gone. All she had left was a rag she called her coverlet, a mattress on the floor, and a broken-down chair. Now standing withered in a corner, forgotten, was a little rose bush she had. In the other corner was a butter cooler to hold water, which froze in winter, rings of ice leaving long-lasting marks indicating the different water levels. She had lost her shame. She now lost her vanity. Sign of ultimate despair, she went out wearing dirty bonnets. Whether for want of time or out of indifference, she no longer mended her clothes. As the heels wore out, she pulled her stockings down into her shoes. This was evident from the vertical wrinkles. She patched her bodice, which was old and worn, with scraps of calico that tore at the slightest movement. The people she owed money to made scenes and gave her no peace. She found them in the street. She found them again on her staircase. She spent nights weeping and thinking. Her eyes were very bright, and she felt a constant pain in her shoulder, near the top of her left shoulder blade. She coughed a great deal. She hated Père Madeleine intensely, but did not complain. She sewed 17 hours a day, but a prison labor contractor, who made the prisoners work for less, brought prices down all of a sudden, which reduced the daily earnings of ordinary working women to 9 sous. 17 hours of toil and 9 sous a day. Her creditors were more pitiless than ever. The second-hand dealer, who had taken back nearly all his furniture, kept on at her. "When will you pay me, you hussy?" From now on, Fantine is addressed by all and sundry as "tu." In God's name, what did they want of her? She felt hunted, and something of the wild beast developed in her. About the same time, Thénardier wrote to her saying that, really, he had been far too good about waiting, and he must have 100 francs immediately. Otherwise, he would turn little Cosette, just convalescing from her serious illness, out of the house, into the cold, and on to the street, and she'd have to look after herself as best she could. And that she would die, if that's what her mother wanted. 100 francs, thought Fantine. But where's there a job that will pay 100 sous a day? Well, she said, let's get on with it and sell the rest. The poor girl became registered as a common prostitute. Whew. Chapter 11, Christus nos liberavit. Liberavit. St. Paul's epistle to the Galatians, Christ hath made us free. What is this story of Fantine about? It is about society buying a slave. From whom? From wretchedness. From hunger, cold, isolation, neglect, destitution. A hard bargain. A soul for a morsel of bread. Society accepts what wretchedness offers. The sacred law of Jesus Christ governs our civilization, but does not yet pervade it. It is said that slavery has disappeared from European civilization. This is false. It still exists, but only women suffer this oppression now, and its name is prostitution. It oppresses women, that is to say, feminine charm, weakness, beauty, motherhood. This is not one of the least of man's reasons to be ashamed. At the point we have now reached in this painful tragedy, there is nothing left of the Fantine she once was. Sinking into the mire, she has hardened into stone. Anyone who touches her feels cold. She passes by, enduring you, ignoring you. She is the stern figure of disgrace. Life and the social order have said all they have to say to her. Everything that will happen to her has happened. She has been through everything, borne everything, sustained everything, suffered everything, lost everything, mourned everything. She is resigned with a resignation that resembles indifference as death resembles sleep. There is nothing more she shrinks from, nothing more she fears. Let the whole rain cloud come down on her and the entire ocean sweep over her. What does she care? She is a saturated sponge. This is at least what she believes. But it is a mistake to imagine that fate has no more in store and that there is a limit to everything. Alas, what are all these lives driven on in such confusion? Where are they going? Why are they like this? He who knows this sees the full extent of the darkness. There is none but He. His name is God. All right. And I need water. Les Miserables is so sad. Jeez. Like, I knew it would be sad, but come on. Giving the voice some rest. Stretching my arms and... Oh, boy. That is a tight wrist. Pardon me. Oh, we got 45 more minutes, so we can read a few more chapters. Chapter 12, Monsieur Bamatabois' Idleness. There is in all small towns, and there was in Montreuil-sur-Mer in particular, a class of young men who nibble on an income of 1,500 francs, much as others, a class of young men who nibble on an income of 1,500 francs, much as others like them gobble up 200,000 francs a year in Paris. These are creatures of the great neuter species, geldings, parasites, non-entities who have a little land, a little foolishness, and a little wit, who would be boors in a salon and think themselves gentlemen in the tavern, who say, "My fields, my peasants, my woods," who boo actresses at the theater to provoke they are men of taste, and quarrel with officers of the garrison to provoke they are men of war, who hunt, smoke, yawn, drink, smell of tobacco, play billiards, stare at the travelers that arrive by stagecoach, live at the cafe, dine at the inn, have a dog that eats the bones under the table and a mistress who puts the dishes on the table, who count every sou, take fashion to extremes, admire tragedy, despise women, wear out their old boots, copy London from Paris and Paris from Pont-à-Mousson, become gaga old men, never work, serve no purpose, and do no great harm. Monsieur Felix Tholomyès, had he remained in the country and never seen Paris, would have been one of these men. If they were richer, you would say, they are dandies. If they were poorer, you would say, they are good-for-nothings. They are simply idlers. Among these idlers are the boring, the bored, the daydreamers, and a few wags. In those days a dandy consisted of a big collar, a big cravat, a watch with watch charms attached to it, 3 waistcoats of different colors worn one on top of the other, with the red and the blue underneath, a short-waisted olive swallowtail coat with a double row of close-set silver buttons running up to the shoulders, trousers of a lighter shade of olive decorated on the 2 seams with rows of piping, the number of rows varying but always uneven, ranging between 1 and 11, a limit that was never exceeded. Add to this ankle boots with little metal heel plates, a narrow-brimmed top hat, hair worn in a quiff, an enormous cane, and conversation spiced with Potier's puns. On top of all that, spurs and a mustache. At that time, a mustache signified respectability, and spurs, one who got about on foot. I have wanted spurs for a long time. But I don't own cowboy boots, I own Chelsea boots. But it'd be fun to put spurs on. Just walk around town. Go to the dentist, Just, it sounds cool. Like, who wouldn't love to hear spurs? But at the same time, I feel like that might attract people who do have spurs. And there's nothing wrong with those people. They're lovely people. I just don't know if I want to gaslight them, make them think that I am they just because I want to wear spurs. But man, I need to do a play where I get to wear spurs. I did Oklahoma, back in high school. We didn't get spurs. We got chaps. Anyway. The provincial dandy wore the longest of spurs and the bushiest of mustaches. It was the period when the republics of South America were fighting against the King of Spain, Bolivar against Murillo. Narrow-brimmed hats were royalist and called Murillos. Liberals wore hats with wide brims called Bolivars. Now, 8 or 10 months after what has been recounted in the preceding pages, sometime about the beginning of January 1823, on an evening when snow had fallen, one of these dandies, one of these idlers, a right-minded fellow, for he wore Murillo, as well as being warmly wrapped in one of those big cloaks that in cold weather completed the fashionable outfit, was having fun tormenting a creature who was loitering in front of the window of the officer's cafe in a dance dress, with her neck and shoulders bare, and with flowers on her head. This dandy was smoking, for that was very much the fashion. Each time this woman passed in front of him, he directed at her, along with a puff from his cigar, some insult he considered witty and amusing, such as, "How ugly you are! Spare me the sight of you! You've no teeth," etc., etc. This gentleman's name was Monsieur Bamatabois. The woman, a sorry-looking, dolled-up spectre, walking back and forth in the snow, did not respond, did not even glance at him, and in silence, with somber regularity, carried on regardless with her perambulations, which every 5 minutes brought her back to this taunting, like the soldier condemned to a flogging who keeps regaining consciousness. Making so little impression on her no doubt piqued the idler, and taking advantage of a moment when her back was turned, he crept up behind her and, stifling his laughter, bent down, picked up a handful of snow from the pavement, and suddenly thrust it down her back between her bare shoulders. The trollop howled, turned, leapt like a panther, and hurled herself at the man, sinking her fingernails into his face with the most dreadful oaths that could possibly spill out of the barrack room into the gutter. These foul words, disgorged in a voice thickened by alcohol, issued hideously from a mouth in which, sure enough, the 2 front teeth were missing. It was Fantine. At the rumpus this created, the officers flocked out of the cafe. Passers-by gathered, and a big circle, laughing, hooting, and clapping, formed round this frenzied whirl consisting of 2 creatures that it was difficult to recognize as a man and a woman. The man trying to defend himself, his hat on the ground, the woman kicking and punching, bareheaded, screaming, toothless and shorn, livid with anger, horrible. Suddenly a tall man burst through the crowd, grabbed the woman by her muddied satin bodice, and said to her, "Follow me." The woman looked up. Her furious voice suddenly died away. Her eyes were dull. From livid she turned ashen, and she trembled, terror-stricken. She had recognized Javert. The dandy took advantage of this turn of events to make his escape. Pausing for a moment to have some water. Hey, it's like 10:22. It's time to point out, if you want to support the stream, head to patreon.com/hotdadreads. That's where you can get access to all of the books we've already read, all of the Shakespeare we've already read, access to the super secret Saturday Shakespeare stream, all kinds of fun things up there. And if you want to support the stream but you don't have any money, perfectly fine. All you gotta do is hit the follow button in one of these corners. It's just a big old heart. That is on the Twitch stream. We're not worried about YouTube right now. That requires 1,000 followers before it can be monetized. So, I won't worry about that when it happens. But we've got over 100 followers between YouTube and Instagram and Twitter. Pardon me. So I'm always asking people, hey, go to twitch.tv/hotdadreads, hit the little heart in the corner, and you can help me get to a place where I can monetize the stream and take money from Jeff Bezos. So once again, patreon.com/hotdadreads. Chapter 13, Resolving Some Questions of Municipal Policing. Javert moved the bystanders aside, broke up the circle, and strode off towards the police station, which is on the far side of the square, dragging the poor wretch after him. With no will of her own, she offered no resistance. Neither he nor she said a word. Beside themselves with joy, the crowd of spectators followed after them, jeering. Utter wretchedness, prompting obscenities. On arriving at the police station, a low-ceilinged room heated by a stove, with an armed guard and a barred, glazed door opening onto the street, Javert opened the door, entered with Fantine, and shut the door behind him, to the great disappointment of the curious onlookers, who stood on tiptoe and craned their necks in front of the dingy window of the station house, trying to see. Curiosity is a form of gluttony. To see is to devour. Inside, Fantine went and collapsed in a corner, still and silent, cowering there like a frightened dog. The sergeant of the guard brought a lighted candle to the table. Javert sat down, drew a sheet of official paper from his pocket, and began to write. Under our laws, women of this social category are placed entirely in the hands of the police. The latter do with them what they please, punish them as they see fit, and confiscate at will those two sad things the women call their trade and their freedom. Javert was impassive. His solemn face betrayed no emotion. Yet he was seriously and deeply preoccupied. It was one of those moments when he was exercising his formidable discretionary powers, with no one to answer to, but with all the scruples of an exacting conscience. At that moment, he felt. The policeman's stool he sat on was a judge's bench. He was sitting in judgment. And he was passing sentence. He summoned up every conceivable thought he might have about the great thing he was doing. The more he considered this woman's deed, the more outraged he felt. It was evident he had just witnessed a crime being committed. He had just seen society, represented by an enfranchised property owner, insulted and attacked out there in the street by a creature totally beyond the pale. A prostitute had assaulted a respectable citizen. He, Javert, had seen this. He wrote in silence. When he had finished, he signed the paper, folded it, and said to the sergeant of the guard as he handed it to him, "Take 3 men and conduct this whore to the cells." Then turning to Fantine, "You've got 6 months." The poor creature gave a start. 6 months, 6 months in prison, she cried. 6 months earning 7 sous a day. But what would become of Cosette, my daughter, my daughter? But I still owe the Thénardiers more than 100 francs. Do you know that, Monsieur l'Inspecteur? Monsieur l'Inspecteur. That's some French for you right there. She dragged herself across the floor that was wet from the muddy boots of all these men, without getting to her feet, with her hands joined, taking great strides on her knees. "Monsieur Javert," she said, "I beg you for mercy. I assure you I'm not to blame. If you'd seen how it started, you'd have seen that. I swear by the good Lord I'm not to blame. It was that gentleman, someone I don't know, who put snow down my back. Do people have the right to put snow down our backs when we're just walking past quietly, doing no one any harm? It gave me a turn. I'm not very well, you see. And he'd already been having a go at me for a while. You are ugly. You've no teeth. I know full well I haven't got my teeth anymore. I didn't do anything. I thought he's a gentleman having his fun. I behaved myself. I didn't speak to him. It was at that moment he put the snow down my back. Monsieur Javert, a dear Monsieur l'Inspecteur. Isn't there someone who might have seen it and could tell you this is the absolute truth? Perhaps I was wrong to get angry. You know, in the first instant, you're not in control of yourself. You overreact. And then having something cold put down your back just when you were not expecting it. I was wrong to ruin the gentleman's hat. Why did he go away? I'd beg his forgiveness. Oh, God. I wouldn't mind at all begging his forgiveness. Spare me today for this once, Monsieur Javert. Listen, this is something you don't know. In prison, you can only earn 7 sous a day. It's not the government's fault, but you earn 7 sous, and can you imagine? I have to pay 100 francs, or my little girl will be sent back to me. Oh my God, I can't have her sent with me. It's so sordid what I do. Oh, my Cosette, my little angel of the dear blessed Virgin. What will become of her? Poor darling. I'll tell you, it's the Thénardiers. They're innkeepers, peasants. There's no reasoning with them. They must be paid. Do not put me in prison. You see, it would mean a little girl being abandoned on the high road to fend for herself in the depths of winter. That's the thing you must have pity on, my dear Monsieur Javert. If she were older, she'd earn her living, but she can't at that age. I'm not a wicked woman at heart. It's not indolence and greed that have made me like this. I drink spirits out of misery, and greed out of misery. I don't like it, but it's deadening. In happier times, you'd only have to look in my closets to see I wasn't a wanton hussy. I'd had decent underclothes. Lots of decent underclothes. Have pity on me, Monsieur Javert. She went on like this, utterly dashed, shaken with sobs, blinded with tears, her shoulders and neck bare, wringing her hands, coughing with a short, dry cough, and mumbling quietly in a voice of anguish. Great grief is a terrible divine illumination that transfigures the wretched. At that point, Fantine had become beautiful again. At certain moments she paused and tenderly kissed the hem of the policeman's coat. She would have softened a heart of granite, but the heart of a man without feeling cannot be softened. Right, said Javert. I have listened to you. Have you nothing more to say? Now get moving. You've got your 6 months. The Eternal Father himself wouldn't be able to do anything about it. At those solemn words, the Eternal Father himself wouldn't be able to do anything about it. She understood that her fate had been decided. She collapsed in a heap, murmuring, "Mercy." Javert turned his back on her. The soldiers grabbed her by the arms. A few moments earlier, a man had entered, unobserved. He shut the door, leaned his back against it, and listened to Fantine's despairing entreaties. Just as the soldiers laid hands on the poor wretch, who would not get up, he took a step forward, emerged from the shadows, and said, "One moment, please." Javert looked up and recognized Monsieur Madeleine. He removed his hat, and bowing with a kind of aggrieved awkwardness, he said, "Excuse me, Monsieur le Maire." Those words, Monsieur le Maire, had a curious effect on Fantine. She stood up all at once like a spectre rising from the earth. thrust aside the soldiers with both arms, walked straight up to Monsieur Madeleine before anyone could prevent her, and staring at him wildly, she cried, "Ah, so you're Monsieur le Maire." Then she burst out laughing and spat in his face. Monsieur Madeleine wiped his face and said, "Inspector Javert, set this woman free." Javert felt he was about to go mad. At that moment he underwent, in rapid succession, and almost all at once, the most violent emotions he had ever experienced in his life. To see a common prostitute spit in the face of a mayor, this was something so monstrous that in his most dreadful imaginings he would have regarded it as sacrilege to believe it were possible. On the other hand, obscurely, at the back of his mind, he made a hideous comparison between what this woman was and what this mayor might be, and then he had an inkling of something very simple about this extraordinary attack that appalled him. But when he saw this mayor, this magistrate, calmly wipe his face and say, "Set this woman free," he was stunned. Thoughts and words failed him equally. His capacity for astonishment was exceeded. He remained speechless. These words had an impact on Fantine no less strange. She raised her bare arm and clung to the damper of the stove like a person reeling. Meanwhile, she looked all around her and began to speak in a low voice as though talking to herself. "Set free? I'm to be let go. I'm not to be put in prison for 6 months. Who said that? It's impossible anyone could have said that. I misheard. It can't have been this monster of a mayor. Was it you, my dear Monsieur Javert, who said I was to be set free? Oh, listen, I'll tell you, and you'll let me go. This monster, this old villain of a mayor, he's the one responsible for everything. Just imagine, Monsieur Javert. He sacked me because of a bunch of shrews gossiping in the workroom. Isn't that a dreadful thing to do? To sack a poor girl who's doing her job honestly? Then I couldn't earn enough, and that's when everything went wrong. For a start, there's one thing these gentlemen of the police certainly ought to do to make things better. That's to stop prison contractors cheating poor people. Listen, I'll explain it to you. You're earning 12 sous making shirts, it drops to 9 sous, and you can't make a living anymore. Then you have to do the best you can. I had my little Cosette. I was forced to become a bad woman. You can see now it's that wretched mayor who did all the harm. Afterwards, I stamped on that gentleman's hat in front of the officers' cafe, but with that snow, he completely spoiled my dress. Women like me have only one silk dress for the evenings. You see, truly, Monsieur Javert, I have never deliberately done anything wrong, and I see women everywhere far more wicked than I am, who are much better off. Oh, Monsieur Javert, it was you that gave orders I was to be set free, wasn't it? Make inquiries, speak to my landlord. I'm up to date with my rent now. People will tell you I pay my way. Oh, God, I'm sorry. Without minding what I was doing, I've moved the damper on the stove, and now it's smoking." Monsieur Madeleine listened to her intently. While she was speaking, he fumbled in his waistcoat, drew out his purse, and opened it. It was empty. He put it back in his pocket. He said to Fantine, "How much did you say you owed?" Fantine, who had been looking at no one else but Javert, turned to him. "I wasn't speaking to you." Then, addressing the soldiers, "Now, you there, did you see how I spat in his face? Ha ha! You villainous old mayor, you're here to frighten me, but I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of Monsieur Javert. I'm afraid of my dear Monsieur Javert." As she said this, she turned back to the inspector. "You see, at the same time, Monsieur l'Inspecteur, you have to be fair. I realize that you are fair, Monsieur l'Inspecteur. Indeed, it's quite simple. A man putting snow down a woman's back for fun, that made the officers laugh. They have to amuse themselves somehow, and that's what women like me are here for, of course. And then you come along. You've no choice but to restore order. You take away the woman who's to blame, but on reflection, seeing as you're kind-hearted, You say I'm to be set free. It's for the sake of the little one. Because spending 6 months in prison, that would mean I couldn't support my child. Only don't do it again, you hussy. Oh, I won't do it again, Monsieur Javert. Whatever anyone does to me now, I won't react in any way. But you see, today I yelled because it hurt. I wasn't at all expecting that snow from the gentleman, and besides, as I told you, I'm not well. I cough. I have what feels like a lump in my stomach, which hurts, and the doctor tells me, take care of yourself. Here, feel. Give me your hand. Don't be afraid. It's here. She was no longer weeping. Her voice was caressing. She placed Javert's huge hand on her delicate white chest and gazed at him, smiling. Briskly, she tidied the disarray of her clothes, smoothed down the folds of her skirt, and that, dragging herself along, had ridden almost up to her knees, and walking towards the door, saying to the soldiers in a subdued voice, and with a friendly nod, Monsieur l'Inspecteur said I was to be released. Lads, I'll be on my way. She laid her hand on the door latch. One more step, and she was in the street. Up to that moment, Javert had stood stock still, staring at the ground, out of place in the midst of this scene, like some statue left in the way, waiting to be put somewhere. The sound of the latch roused him. He raised his head with an expression of supreme authority, an expression that is always the more frightening the lower the level at which power is invested, ferocious in the wild beast, atrocious in the man of no account. Sergeant, he cried, can't you see that Minx is walking out of here? Who told you to let her go? I did, said Madeleine. At the sound of Javert's voice, Fantine trembled and let go of the latch, like a thief dropping the stolen article. At the sound of Madeleine's voice, she turned round, and from that moment on, without uttering a word, without her so much as daring to breathe freely, her eyes traveled back and forth, from Madeleine to Javert, and from Javert to Madeleine, depending on which of them was speaking. It was obvious that Javert must have been thrown out of kilter, as they say, to allow himself to address the sergeant the way he did after the mayor's request that Fantine should be set free. Could he have forgotten Monsieur le Maire's presence? Had he in the end convinced himself it was impossible that any authority could have given such an order, and that surely Monsieur le Maire must have said one thing instead of another without meaning to? Or, in view of the outrages he had witnessed over the past 2 hours, did he tell himself it was necessary to act with the utmost resolve, that the humble must assume greatness, the sleuth must turn himself into a judge, the police agent must become the agent of justice, and that in this exceptional extremity, he, Javert, was the personification of law, order, morality, government, the whole of society? In any case, when Monsieur Madeleine uttered the words we have just heard, I did, Police Inspector Javert, pale, cold, with blue lips and a look of despair, his whole body quivering almost imperceptibly, was seen to turn to the mayor and, what was incredible, say to him with downcast eyes, but in a firm voice, Monsieur le Maire, that cannot be. Why not? Said Monsieur Madeleine. This wretch has insulted a gentleman. Inspector Javert, replied the mayor in a calm and conciliatory tone. Listen, you are an honest man, and I have no objection to explaining myself to you. This is the truth of the matter. I was passing through the square as you were taking this woman away. There were still some stragglers. I made inquiries. I got the whole story. The gentleman was to blame, and by rights it was he who should have been arrested by the police. Javert retorted, This wretch has just insulted Monsieur le Maire. That's my concern, said Monsieur Madeleine. The insult to me is mine, you know. I can do what I like about it. I beg Monsieur le Maire's pardon. The insult is not to him, but to the rule of law. Inspector Javert, replied Monsieur Madeleine, the highest law is conscience. I heard this woman. I know what I'm doing. And I don't understand what I'm seeing, Monsieur le Maire. Then be satisfied with obeying. I'm obeying my duty. My duty demands that this woman serve 6 months in prison. Monsieur Madeleine replied quietly, Listen carefully to what I say. She will not serve a single day. At this peremptory statement, Javert dared to gaze intently at the mayor, and to say, but in a still profoundly respectful tone of voice, I deeply regret opposing Monsieur le Maire. This is the first time in my life, but he will be so good as to allow me to point out that I am acting within the scope of my authority. Since Monsieur le Maire so wishes, I restrict myself to the incident involving the gentleman. I was there. This woman hurled herself at Monsieur Bamatabois, who is the enfranchised owner of the handsome 3-story freestone house with a balcony that stands in the corner of the parade. After all, there are some undeniable facts in this world. In any case, Monsieur le Maire, this is a matter of policing the streets, which is my concern, and I am detaining this woman Fantine. Then Monsieur Madeleine folded his arms and said in a stern voice that no one in the town had heard up till now, The matter to which you refer is a municipal police matter, of which, according to the terms of Articles 9, 15, and 65 of the Criminal Procedures Code, I am the judge. I order this woman to be set free. Javert was determined to make one last effort. But, Monsieur le Maire, I would remind you, Monsieur, of Article 81 of the law passed on the 13th of December, 1799, regarding arbitrary detention. Monsieur le Maire, allow not another word. But go, said Monsieur Madeleine. Javert took the blow like a Russian soldier, upright, facing it, and full in the chest. He gave the deepest of bows to Monsieur le Maire and left. Fantine moved away from the door and stared in amazement as he passed in front of her. However, she too was thrown into a strange confusion. She had just seen herself in some way fought over. She had just seen herself in some way fought over by two opposing powers. That's a weird sentence. She had just seen herself fought over by two opposing powers. Before her very eyes, she had seen the battle between two men holding in their hands her freedom, her life, her soul, her child. One of these men was dragging her towards darkness, the other leading her back to the light. In this conflict, seen magnified by terror, these two men appeared to her as two giants. One spoke like her demon, the other like her good angel. The angel had conquered the demon, and what made her shudder from head to foot was that this angel, this liberator, was precisely the man she abhorred. That same mayor she had so long regarded as the author of all her woes, that Madeleine. And at the very moment when she had just insulted him in a hideous manner, he saved her. Had she then been mistaken? Must she then have a complete change of heart? She did not know. She trembled. She listened in bewilderment. She watched in dismay, and at every word that Monsieur Madeleine said, she felt the disillusion and dispersal inside her of the frightful shades of hatred, and the birth in her heart of something beyond expression. An indefinable warmth that was joy trust, love. Fantine is now addressed as vous. When Javert had gone, Monsieur Madeleine turned to her and said, in a deliberate voice, having difficulty speaking, like a serious-minded person who does not want to give way to tears, I heard you. I knew nothing of what you said. I believe it's true, and I feel that it's true. I didn't even know you'd left my factory. Why didn't you come to me? But listen, I'll pay your debts. I'll send for your child, or you shall go to her. You shall live here, in Paris, wherever you like. I'll take care of you and your child. If you want, you shan't work again. I'll give you all the money you need. In regaining your happiness, you'll regain respectability. And listen, let me tell you right now, if everything is as you say, and I don't doubt it, you've never ceased to be virtuous and holy in the sight of God. Oh, poor woman. This was more than Fantine could bear. To have Cosette, to leave behind this life of degradation, to live free, rich, happy, and respectable with Cosette, to see the sudden unfolding in the midst of her misery of all this paradise come true. She stared as though stupefied at this man who was talking to her, and she could only give vent to 2 or 3 sobs. Oh, oh, oh. Her legs buckled. She knelt before Monsieur Madeleine, and before he could prevent her, he felt her take his hand and pressed her lips to it. Then she fainted. Thus ends Book 5. Book 6 is called Javert, but we're going to call it there. Oh. It's so sad. Jeez. These are not the parts of the musical that I cry at, you know? Oh. I mean, I Dreamed a Dream is good and sad, you know, when done well. But, whew. Oh. My arm hurts. But hey, thank you everyone for coming and hanging out with us. I'm just seeing how many pages we read this time. Père Fauchelevent, was that where we started? Sir Madeleine Morning, Vague Glimmerings on the Horizon, 155 to 185. So yeah, so roughly 30 pages a day. So that's 120 pages a week. I can't do Fridays. If I could do Fridays, it'd be even 150. 2 weeks for 300 pages. 6, 9, 12. So it'd be roughly 8 weeks. But we're missing a day each, so 10, 11, 12 weeks total. So we're a good 2 weeks into this, I think. Well, more than 2 weeks now, but we've changed our reading pace, so. Yeah. What? 10 more weeks of Les Miserables. It's a whole semester, this book. But the way I see it, and, tell your friends, let's say you're a high schooler or a collegiate person, and you're going to be doing a production of Les Miserables, and you're like, oh man, that's Les Miserables, that's my favorite musical. We're doing the kids version, the school version, whatever. We're doing a whatever production of it. It's so cool. I want to have read the book, but man, it takes so long to read the book. Hey, I'm reading it for you. This is the summer to learn how Les Miserables was, written and performed and whatnot. Pardon me. This is the summer to let me do your homework for you. while you play video games and take a nap and whatever and just absorb the book through me. So tell your friends, this summer we're doing Les Miserables for as long as I can, because I got my own rehearsals to go to sometimes. So, we're going to see how far we get in this before things might get hairy, and then we'll have a more strange stream. But for now, Monday through Thursday, 9 to 11. I'm so tired, but I get to be done now, so. My voice feels great, too. I'm really happy about that. Where am I going with this? That stays there. Pointing out one more time, the social medias, Instagram and Twitter are both at Hot Dad Reads, all one word. Social media is hard right now, and I don't particularly like anyone's social media. But that's what I got for now, and, if that changes in the future, I'll let you guys know. Patreon.com/HotDadReads if you want to support the stream financially. And again, we've already read Pride and Prejudice, War of the Worlds. We've got, every time in between books, we read a little bit of Edgar Allan Poe, so he's on there. For Shakespeare, we've already read Much Ado About Nothing, and we're going to finish Julius Caesar very soon. So if any of those spark your interest, if you're like, man, I really want to have read those books, or at least have a hot dad read them to me, well, here we go. This is your chance. Just pledge on the Patreon. You get access to all of that. The way I see it, if you want to get the audiobook of Pride and Prejudice, that's like $30. You can get it from me for $15. And War of the Worlds. And Much Ado About Nothing. And Julius Caesar. So $15 a month for that particular level. But the cheapest one's only $5. So come in for $5 and enjoy some Shakespeare with me. And hey, if you can't afford to do it financially, no big deal. Just go to twitch.tv/HotDadReads. I'm going to point to this corner. I'm pretty sure it's not this corner. I'm going to point to this corner. There's a little heart. You just click the heart, and that follows the stream. We're trying to get over 50 followers, and then we can monetize the stream, which, if you guys want to donate money, that's fine by me. But really, I'm trying to get money from Jeff Bezos. I want that ad money that you're not paying for, but that they are. So, yeah. I'm going to turn in. I'm real tired. But I hope that you all have a very agreeable evening. Ooh. Gonna take a walk in a place that's dark and spooky.